Hello and welcome to our lecture entitled Economic Systems. Who decides what? This information is from Chapter 3, Section 3 of our Economics Alive textbook. Let's go ahead and get started. In Section 2 of Chapter 3, we learned that all societies, all countries, all economies have to answer three questions. What goods and services are they going to produce? How are those goods and services going to be produced? And for whom are those goods and services going to be produced? These answers combine to make a country's economic system. If we look at history, there are only three types of economic systems: a traditional economy, a command economy, and a free market economy, sometimes referred to as just a market economy. In other words, there are those that are built on tradition, there are those based on the command of rulers, and then there are economies that are organized by free markets. In class, we voted which of the 6 economic goals we felt was most important: economic freedom, freedom to do whatever you choose in the economy, buy what you want, sell what you want, work where you want, create what you want; economic efficiency. An economically efficient economy would make the best use of its resources. Economic equity, where everyone is equal. Economic growth, is the economy growing and expanding? Economic security, does everyone have a job with a wage that they can depend on? And economic stability, are things going to stay consistent, or are they going to be in flux? All three economies, traditional, command, and market, have different economic goals. Let's begin by looking at traditional economies. A traditional economy is defined as one in which custom and tradition decide what to produce, how to produce it, and for whom to produce it. Some examples that you might find today would be where you find indigenous people who are living much like their ancestors did hundreds or thousands of years ago. And oftentimes, these groups of people kind of live separately from the rest of society, from the rest of the world. So, this is a tribe of people in northern Mongolia. You would find traditional economies among the Eskimo and Inuit Indians of Alaska. And you would also find traditional economies among the indigenous people of South America. These men are from Peru. And in their traditional economy, like many traditional economies, what they produced is often agricultural. And oftentimes they practice what is known as subsistence farming. That is where you grow enough food to provide for yourself, not to trade with others. So these men and their community, their society, grow enough food to feed the people in their group, and they probably don't engage in a whole lot of trade with outsiders. How traditional economies produce what they need is often through farming or herding of animals. Many practice fishing and hunting, as well as gathering of wild plants. If you look at the traditional economies among the indigenous people still living in the Brazilian rainforests, you would find a lot of people still fishing, hunting, and gathering wild plants as part of their economy. And in traditional economies, exactly who does what in the economy is often defined by social customs. And more often than not, labor is divided along gender lines. For example, women are in charge of gathering, men may be in charge of hunting. When traditional economies determine who they are producing for, It's another question that's answered by tradition. And social hierarchies play a large role in deciding, making those choices. For example, the hunters might be fed first, or maybe the grandparents, or maybe the leaders of the society. Whatever their tradition and their custom dictates is going to control for whom goods are produced, how they're produced, and what is produced. That's traditional economies. And the goal of traditional economies is security and stability. Everyone has a job in a traditional economy, and things aren't going to change. After all, they're based on custom and tradition. The question, or the answer to the question, how are we going to produce this, is the way we always have. So obviously, it's a very stable economy. However, take a look at this next picture. Traditional economies are struggling to survive in the modern world. As we enter an era of global interdependence, where economies are mixing and trading and working together on a much larger scale than they ever have in history, it is harder and harder for these small traditional economies to remain completely isolated. Next, we'll move on to command economies. Command economies were the second type of economy to emerge after traditional economies. And we have had command economies in ancient history, and we've also had some modern command economies. We will look at modern command economies at the end of our lecture today. Let's instead, right now, look at command economies in history. And some examples of command economies in ancient history, or just history, would be ancient Egypt, ancient China, which these statues are from, and the absolute monarchs of Europe that you studied during your freshman year in world studies. And in a command economy, decisions about what to make, decisions about how to make them, and decisions about for whom goods and services are going to be produced are all made by a powerful ruler or some other authority, possibly church officials, possibly a committee, possibly a communist party, and we'll get to that later. But in a command economy, all those economic decisions are made by the government. And normally, or at least in history, command economies decided what to produce by looking at whatever was needed to keep the ruler powerful. If a ruler needed military weapons to stay in power, military weapons were focused on. If a ruler was worried about famine leading to revolt, then food production was focused on. If the ruler thought that he could gain wealth and power through trade, goods for trade were produced. Oftentimes in command economies, little regard was paid to the welfare and health and even lives of the common people. An example of this was the Tsar's construction of the city of St. Petersburg in Russia. The Tsar was the absolute monarch who ruled over Russia. The Tsar wanted a city where St. Petersburg is today, so the Tsar had his peasants build that city. They irrigated the swamp that was there, and they built the city, and hundreds, if not thousands of peasants died in the construction of that city because that's what the Tsar wanted. And as you can see, oftentimes when command economies looked at for whom goods were going to be produced, it was for whom it would benefit the ruler. Command economies strive for security. Everyone is going to have a place in society. Everyone is going to have a job. And equity. Everyone is going to be equal, as long as you're not the ruler. But all of the lower class is going to be equal.